The future of football is now. The NFL Draft is here, and the Athletic Football Show is bringing you all the action live on YouTube on April 24th and 25th.
From the first overall pick in the draft all the way through the last pick in round 3, we'll break it all down in real time. Who's going at the top? What trades will shake up the draft board? There's no angle in this draft that we won't cover.
We'll have expert analysis, insight powered by the Beast, guests from the Athletic newsroom, and everything you need to know from one of the NFL's signature events.
Don't just watch the draft, experience it with the Athletic Football Show, streaming live on YouTube, April 24th and 25th. Well, it is the day before the 2025 NFL Draft. We are in Chicago at my kitchen table, which is a new experience for all of us, but I think it feels pretty good. It feels pretty natural. I'm glad that we're here. And we are doing a show today that we have done, I think, each of the last 4 or 5 years, Dane, essentially since we started doing the draft show. And pretty much the way that we celebrate the draft arriving is we do a show about the biggest questions we have heading into that year's draft, and this year is no exception. That's what we're doing today. The biggest questions we have heading into a 2025 NFL Draft that has a weird amount of intrigue just because it feels like virtually anything is on the table, not only for the first round, but I think a little bit deeper into the draft as well.
Yeah, first off, thanks for inviting us into your home. It's beautiful. Just kind of like all of Chicago. It's my first time here in 20 years, and it's been awesome. But it's funny, draft eve, you would think that the closer you get to the draft, the more you know, and then draft eve hits, and you're like, all right, I know nothing. Like the amount of uncertainty.
Subterfuge.
Yes. The amount of uncertainty, the amount of things you hear, like just working on my final mock draft this morning and just texting a million people, and the amount of varied responses about what they think teams are going to do, about this guy falling, this guy's not going to fall. It's fascinating. So this will be an interesting discussion, and then hopefully get us poised for what we can expect for tomorrow night.
Derrik, this is your first round with us doing draft coverage, the draft show. How you feeling 24 hours out?
Didn't think my first show with it would be in your house. You know, we rented out a studio and everything for Thursday and Friday night, so I assumed it would be there, but it's kind of fun that it's here. I'm very happy to be here. Like, I watched the show previously, so to now be a part of it is incredible. But like Dane said, you do all this work up until pretty much the week before the draft of crystallizing draft needs and who do we think is going to do what, and then that Monday of draft week hits and it's like, oh, none of that mattered. I could have started my draft prep 3 days ago and it probably would have been about the same.
All right, so let's get started here. We got about a dozen questions that we want to ask about this class and about this draft as we sit about 24 hours out from the draft and from our live draft show. I'm just going to kick it off with one of the bigger questions about every single draft day, and that is where are the quarterbacks going to go and how many quarterbacks do we get? So I'm going to present this to you right now. We are, again, about 24 hours out from the first round starting. Over under 1.5 quarterbacks go in the first round of this draft.
I'll take the over. It's just so rare to see just one. Right? And so odds tell us it will be over. Now, who's that going to be and where?
And which team?
Exactly. That's a little tougher. It's fascinating. This is a draft where, so the last 27 drafts, we've had more quarterbacks go in the 21 to 40 range as opposed to the top 20 just 3 times. It rarely happens, but it sure seems like that's going to happen this year. And the last time,
what years were that? 2011 was like that, right? That was the Andy Dalton and Colin Kaepernick, or no?
2014 was the last year. That was Manziel,
Teddy Bridgewater,
yep, and even Carr, Garoppolo.
That's right. There was a lot of second-round quarterbacks that year.
And then I think it was 05 and 07. I think were the 3.
That makes sense.
So yeah, it doesn't happen very often. It hasn't happened in over a decade. So the fact that we likely get it this year, because obviously Cam Ward's going 1, and then we're on quarterback 2 watch. I used to call it Shedeur watch. Now I'm calling it quarterback 2 watch because it's no guarantee that Shedeur Sanders is the second quarterback drafted. It is interesting that the betting odds are for where Shedeur is going to be drafted is 20.5, which is
the Steelers.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and look, Vegas, they go by what, people like me say, so they're
I remember the Will Levis had the best betting odds to go number 2 time. I remember that 6 hours we had a few years ago.
Yes, exactly. So it is interesting what the Steelers, they're kind of like a pivot point in this draft for the quarterbacks. Does a quarterback go there? And if not, then are we just waiting for the trade? Whether it's the Giants, the Browns, maybe the Saints, to trade back into the first round to get either Jackson Dart or Shedeur Sanders or whoever, Jalen Milroe, who knows. it's just a reminder of how there's no consensus at any position. It doesn't matter if we're talking quarterbacks or tackles. There's no consensus team to team about how they stack these guys. And so if Jackson Dart's the second quarterback drafted, that shouldn't surprise anybody. That's just how the draft works. And so I think there's a good chance, we see the Giants maybe trade up. Maybe say the Vikings are a prime candidate because they only have, 4 picks in this draft. If they move back a little bit, the Rams could be open for business. So somewhere in the 20s, I think we get that second quarterback drafted. Right now, you ask me, I'm going to say the Steelers don't go quarterback. Second quarterback comes off the board in the 20s. But which team? I would guess the Giants. That'd be my guess right now. And right now, I'll say Jackson Dart. Does Shedeur get in there? I don't know. It's fascinating.
I'm leaning closer and closer to I think Shedeur in the top 10 is absolutely not happening. I don't think any other quarterback in the top 10 is happening. Where, again, a week ago, I think we were all convinced that somebody could go top 10.
The Saints is the team. They're the team that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
I don't think the Giants can justify taking a quarterback at 3 based on the other players that'll be on the board. The Saints at 9, I think that's where it becomes interesting. We haven't really talked about the Saints quarterback situation in a post-Derrik Carr world, which we can in a second. But to me, that's really the only other team that maybe they can justify taking a quarterback in the top 10, and I still don't think that's a likelihood.
Because even them, some of the other quarterback-needy teams, the Giants, they kind of got to win now. Cleveland a little bit feels like they got to win now. The Saints are more in new regime just started. Do they really feel like they need to press and immediately reach on one of these quarterbacks? That's where I think it kind of gets complicated for them.
That the Saints are any
I
other
guess
team.
the Saints operating on
the way that they
yeah.
operate. My response to this Derrik Carr situation would be embrace it. Just be bad. Just play Spencer Rattler for the entire year.
Now you're talking about language.
Be a team that finishes with one of the 3 worst records in the league, and then next year, when the quarterbacks are better, you are positioned to draft a quarterback. The idea that because you don't have Derrik Carr, you immediately need to draft a quarterback in the first round of this draft is completely misguided to me. I would never understand that as a thought process.
Well, I do not believe they are a Shedeur team. I think Shedeur's off the table for them. So would they take Jackson Dart at 9? It's the Saints. That's something they would do. But will they do it? I'd be surprised.
If they love Jackson Dart, fine.
Right.
But if their thought process is we need to get a quarterback because we no longer have Derrik Carr, that to me is just a mistake from the jump, thinking that way.
Right. And I don't think that's the way they're looking. I think that we know how aggressive they'll be moving around. They don't trade back. They trade up. And so if they traded up from 40 or wherever they're picking in the second round into the 20s, they'll go get a guy. I think that's right on brand for them.
See, that would make more sense if they took Tyler Warren at 9 or whoever it is, and then they go back up to 23, 24, whatever it is to go get their player. That would make more sense to me. I still don't know if I love any of the quarterbacks in that range, but as an idea, that makes more sense to me than 9th overall for any of these guys.
The other quarterback question that I have, and we kind of touched on this, how far could Shedeur fall? Does he fall out of the first round? Does the team go back into the first round to get him? Is there a surprise quarterback team we're not thinking about or that we haven't talked as much about? Is it the Rams? Is it the Raiders? Is there a team that's going to do something crazy? We didn't think the Falcons were going to draft a quarterback in the top 10 last year, and then it ended up happening. So is there some team let me look at the back half of the first round. So let's say the Vikings are on the board at 24. They're on the clock. They want to trade back. They have 1 pick in the next 6 years.
Right.
They need more picks. Do we see a team kind of flash up there that we didn't necessarily expect? And the Rams are at 26, so they could just stay put if they wanted to do that. But a surprise quarterback team that might jump the Giants or jump one of those other teams to get back into the first round and take somebody, that's another one that feels like it might be lurking a little bit in a way that we're not really talking about so much.
I don't know if there is one, though. Cleveland obviously is the team we talked about. The Giants we talked about. The Saints we talked about. We know Seattle's kind of flirting with it a little bit.
Seattle and the Raiders are 2 teams that are out there too.
Mm-hmm. So that's a possibility, especially with Seattle having those 2-2s. They've got a little bit of ammo to play around with. If there's a guy they really like, that's at least feasible, especially if, would they do it at 18? Probably not, but they could move around in the second round. That's certainly on the table, I would think. Then, the Raiders, whenever you have a first-year general manager, a new coach, you just have to be open-minded to all the possibilities, and especially with the Raiders picking top 6, and they're going to get a high player on their board at 6, and then they can come back, and if they love one of these quarterbacks, it's something that I wouldn't completely rule out, even if it would be a little bit surprising.
It would be surprising, and I actually don't support it for either team. I wouldn't like to see them do that based on what they've done this offseason, but I'm just trying to think who might be the teams that could surprise us that we haven't talked that much about, and those 2 come to mind.
The one I'm trying to sell because I just kind of want to see it. I really want Jalen Miller on the Rams. I don't know if in the first round, if that's a good idea. He did get invited to the green room, so it could be on the table. But I think for such a long time, and I've said this on the show before, McVay has flirted with the mobile quarterbacks. Like, he clearly wants to see what his offense can be with one of these, and I think giving Milroe.
Are you saying John Wolford is that flirtation?
Well, it's a step in the right direction. And he had who was the guy they had start a game? I think that same year, Bryce Perkins, maybe.
Yeah,
he ran for like
Virginia
100-something yards in that game.
Yeah.
Like, this is something McVay, for a lot of his backups, has like flirted with the idea of mobility. And so Milroe is no longer flirting. Like, you are going all the way into that style of play. But I think to get him 2 years to fix some of his mechanics a little bit, see if he can clean up some of the way that he reads the game, behind Matthew Stafford, I think that would just be electric.
Well, I think that's also why we've seen Jackson Dart kind of connected with the Rams a little bit too, because he has a running element to his game, and there's plenty to like. He's very toolsy, even if he's still unproven in a lot of areas. So yeah, I think that's something you can't completely rule out too.
We were talking about this at dinner the other night. We were talking about players that you maybe don't like or you think are imperfect, but then they get drafted by a certain team and it completely changes the way that you think about them.
That was Bo Nix and Denver last year for me.
Yes.
If Jackson Dart gets picked by the Rams at 26, I will be in
knew
on
it.
Jackson
Yeah.
Dart. I am so out on Jackson Dart now, but
Right.
if he gets picked by the Rams at 26, I'll be like, maybe I'm just wrong about this. Again, I don't think it's going to happen. But
That was Bo
if
Nix
that did.
for me last year. Exactly. It's like Bo Nix. I don't know. I have a hard time. And then he gets Sean Payton drafts him, and I'm like, all right, well, yep. Forget everything I said the last 6 months. He's going to be pretty decent. Yeah, it turned out.
The other team we have not mentioned outside of the Shador thing is what the Steelers are going to do at quarterback.
Yeah.
Are the Steelers in a place where they want to leave this draft with a quarterback based on their current situation? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if they feel like we don't have a future plan, we don't love the Rodgers thing, we're kind of drifting away from that right now, but we need an answer for the next few years. Is this the time to do that? For them, it almost feels like it might be as good a time as any. I think the Saints will probably be picking in the top 10 again next year. I don't know that about the Steelers. So how they think about their current and future quarterback plans in the context of this draft, I think is kind of a fascinating question.
I think both the Steelers and Rodgers are waiting until April 27th to see if they need each other. I think they're both just, if the right guy falls for Pittsburgh, cool, maybe they'll take him. If not, they know they have somebody, waiting on them.
And the Kirk Cousins thing is also looming out there.
Right.
For the team that misses out on a rookie quarterback or decides they don't want to stretch for one that's not in on Rodgers but still wants a stopgap veteran starter, Cousins is one of the dominoes that could fall as early as this weekend. Maybe it's a post-draft thing. Maybe he wants to see exactly where the dust settles, especially coming off the heels of what happened last year. But sometime in the next week or so, it probably wouldn't be surprising to see a little bit of movement on the Kirk Cousins thing.
It certainly seems that Kirk Cousins he's clearly scarred from what happened last year.
Understandably so.
It does not want that to happen again, where he is blindsided, because he's been in this league a long time. He knows teams are going to say certain things. Things can change. Things will pivot. And he doesn't want to go to a situation where all of a sudden he could get beat out in training camp, potentially, depending on the injury and the way he's working back. So the Steelers I believe that they do like Mason Rudolph quite a bit. But is that really the answer you're okay going into the season with as your guy?
It can't be.
And
They know enough of him that it can't be.
I would hope not. I would certainly hope not.
When you look at the window and the age of the difference-making players on that team,
Right.
the idea of burning a year on Mason Rudolph when you have TJ Watt in the last year of his contract, you have Cam Hayward at 35, 36 years old, Minka's on the wrong side of 30 now, I just don't think you can justify that. I'd be shocked. And if I were a Steelers fan, I would be apoplectic. I'd be beside myself if that's what they ended up
Why
doing.
didn't you just bring Russell Wilson back?
Yes.
Right, yes. At least you could understand the Russell Wilson, Justin Fields stuff last year. I don't think you could understand doing the Mason Rudolph thing.
Let's get back to some other positions here and some other things that might unfold in the top 10. My next question here, who jumps at Ashton Jeanty? Where does he go? What is the landing spot? How high does he go? And the more that I've thought about it, and you've been on this, and I think to me it feels like the right answer, if you're the Jags at 5, why wouldn't you do that?
100%.
Because everyone in the process has been mocking Mason Graham to the Jaguars. And Mason Graham is a good player. I like watching Mason Graham. The idea of a player with Mason Graham's profile going 5th overall, people are going to talk about Ashton Jeanty being a surprise there. It would also be a surprise if a guy like Mason Graham went 5th overall.
100%.
So I just don't – we can talk all about premium positions and about what you're paying him. He'll essentially be like the 8th to 10th best or highest paid running back in the league immediately, and that's if he hits. So you're not getting a lot of surplus value at all if you do that. We've had this conversation 1,000 times over the last decade. But in this draft specifically, I just think that you can justify it. And it also kind of bleeds into a conversation about the new regimes. Like, we have no idea what this Jags team is going to do. We have no idea what the Raiders are going to do. We have no idea what the Jets are going to do. And I think that's what makes the top 10 even more intriguing because there's so many question marks.
And that's when I text around the league to my buddies picking in the top half of round 1, not with the Jaguars, to kind of get the same response. I've got no idea what this new guy's going to do. Yeah. Like, that's kind of what they all say. And so, and the Jaguars are very buttoned up. There's not a lot coming out. They're not giving us a lot of breadcrumbs about where they're looking. It's more, okay, and back to what you were saying about Jeanty, it's not like if there's a 1A pass rusher and a 1A running back, take the pass rusher, obviously. But we're talking about a 1A running back and then there's a drop-off. And then you're going to take a lesser player just because he plays a different position that is higher in terms of how much he gets paid and, just the hierarchy of how easy it is to find those guys. Like, it just doesn't, I don't know. It doesn't match up. So, yes, I'm all for waiting to draft a running back, but the Falcons don't regret drafting Bijan Robinson where they did. The Lions don't regret drafting Jahmyr Gibbs where they did. And in this draft, at number 5 overall, it's not too early to draft a running back with the talent of Ashton Jeanty. So, and you think about ETN, okay, final year of his deal, he averaged 3.7 yards per carry last year. Yes, part of that's the offensive line. Some of those issues still exist on that offensive line. So I understand the argument that it doesn't matter who's back there. They need to fix the run game. You could argue, okay, that was part of the old coaching regime too, of why the running game wasn't working. And
that to me is the biggest point.
Exactly.
Even if you look at Tampa last year, and obviously they had better players, they added players in the offseason. They go get Graham Barton. They have arguably the best tackle in the league at this point. Yep. They have guys that were ascending players. Cody Mauch in year 2. Ben Bredesen has a career year. Luka Decky takes a huge step forward. The talent on that team is better than what Jacksonville probably has, but we wouldn't have said that heading into last year. Like, the schematics matter here, and the offensive line coach did not come with him because the Bucs didn't let anybody go with him. But I do think what we saw out of that Tampa team last year and the ecosystem they were able to create in the run game, in the screen game, that's where I think you can get there with Jeanty behind that offensive line and thinking that it can actually be successful.
And I don't think they're going to be as good as the Bucs offensive line. They were incredible last year, but you could sell yourself on some degree of jump for them. Like, Anton Harrison was awesome as a rookie, not so good as a sophomore, but you could absolutely tell me, like, with Liam Cohen running the offense, that he takes a step. Walker Little, his first year being the full-time potential left tackle, okay, you could totally, I could understand the idea of him playing well. They tried to shore up the interior of the offensive line, which to me was their biggest issue. So the fact that they went out and got
Robert Hainsey,
right, not difference makers, but guys who are professionals,
Patrick McCarry,
who can run the offense, and that's all you need. And so if you insert Jeanty into the offense, who I don't think it would be surprising if he's one of the best 6 best running backs in the NFL almost immediately. Like, yeah, that could be an awesome run game, and that was the basis of what Cohen was trying to do. It's the basis of what all those offenses that he's come from and worked with are trying to do. So for me, it's just once you get to the point where you don't have any more guys in this tier of take them in the top 5, the premium position stuff just doesn't matter anymore. Just take the good guy.
This draft, outside of the quarterbacks are a main difference here. Right. But this draft, other than the quarterbacks in the top 5, reminds me of the 2023 draft, where we had Will Anderson and Jalen Carter were kind of these above everybody else in a different tier of players. Carter fell for obviously reasons that we understand. But other than that, pretty much everybody aside from those guys was a question mark in the top 10 other than Bijan Robinson. The only reason that Bijan Robinson wouldn't be somebody you draft in the top 10 is the position he plays. Right. And that kind of feels like the same thing we're talking about now. Yeah. We just don't have 3 quarterbacks that are going to be in the top 5 of this draft.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, Paris Johnson in that draft was, a good player, but wasn't looked at as Penei Sewell, absolutely needs to be a top 7 pick.
Tyree Wilson, Devin Witherspoon went in the top 10. Darnell Wright feels more like the tackles in this class than he felt like the tackles in last class. So I do think there are a lot of parallels and the contours of the talent pool.
And Witherspoon is a great one to bring up because I think with some of the other guys that are potentially going to go top 10 in this position, it's like positional stuff or all this jazz. Witherspoon was one, you actually don't see that many corners go in like the top 7.
No.
But also, we didn't know if he was even going to play outside. And then
And
in
he
the NFL, he hasn't. Yeah,
Right.
it's so that was the kind of thing is like, do I want to take a guy like this in the top 5? But, obviously Jeanty and Witherspoon play very different positions. But if you take a guy at 5 and he turns out to be a guy who can be a Pro Bowler, it's fine. Like, it doesn't matter anymore.
So let's say Jeanty falls past 5, and maybe there's a world where a team trades up and gets him before 5.
We got to watch for that for the Patriots.
Do you think
at 4.
that's real? Like,
Absolutely.
Okay,
100%.
so let's play out the hypothetical. Let's say the Patriots on the clock at 4.
Mm-hmm.
They know they can wait and get one of the tackles if they trade down into the back half of the top 10.
Right.
Who do you think is the most likely, or teams that we should watch that could jump the Jags to try to go get Ashton Jeanty?
We can talk about your Bears.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Look, I'm a big believer that top 5, you draft players, not positions. And to go get a guy like Ashton Jeanty, regardless of how you view the running back position, to go get a difference maker, I mean, you package one of those 2s, maybe throw in another sweetener to go from 10 to 4. That might be enough for the Patriots. It'll be interesting to see the discount that we have with trades this year. Like, obviously, you're going to pay attention to the trade chart, but maybe you are more inclined, if you're the Patriots or one of these other teams, to take just a little bit less to go back and get more draft capital and still feel like you're getting, all right, we really like Membu and Banks and Connerly, and so we know we're going to get a tackle at 10. I think that is definitely not something I'm going to say is likely, but you can't rule that one out.
I think a more interesting question with the Patriots' potential trade is how far down would they be willing to go? It's not about compensation to me. It's like, how far down the board are you willing to go? Because obviously I think a team like Denver, they probably want to move up. Obviously it would cost a lot to get all the way to 4. But do the Patriots want to go all the way down to 20 when they might get picked? Some of the tackles are going to be off the board. Whereas I feel like, to me, the cutoff is probably like Dallas at 12. Like, I cannot imagine them going further than that.
It's a great question. I think it's going to depend on how many tackles you see in that tier, right? So
Yeah.
how many of those guys are you willing to come away with if you move down? If the answer is Campbell, Membu, Banks, Connerly, if it's like 4 to 5 guys, then you're probably willing to move down a little bit further. If there's a cutoff somewhere, let's say it's after Banks or something like that, then that changes the calculus if you're the Patriots.
Plus, I don't know, once we get down to that range, we're talking about a team having to use next year's first to go up there. And that's where, as much as I love Ashton Jeanty, are we going to trade future ones to go get a running back?
Probably not.
Exactly. So I think Dallas is probably the good spot where, theoretically, you wouldn't have to use a future first to go do it. But yeah, the Patriots, I think they're open for business, but at the same time, I think they're perfectly fine staying put at 4 and taking Campbell.
The Jeanty thing is hard for me to justify. And it's not for the reasons that I think we heard a lot about for the Bears specifically.
Right.
It's not for the reasons that we heard a lot about throughout the process. I think so many people through the process said, it's a deep running back class, it's a deep running back class, you can wait on it. And after watching all of them, to me, Jeanty is a different thing than all of the other running backs. And so the idea that you can draft a running back in the second round is the reason you should pass on Ashton Jeanty. I'm not buying that.
Right.
But at the same time, I still think the Bears specifically, even with those 2-2s, they have too many long-term needs to justify this. We don't know who the left tackle is going to be after this year. They need safety depth. They need interior defensive line depth. There's so many positions. They need edge depth.
Right.
There are way too many holes on the second line of the depth chart for me to justify giving away a second-round pick, even for somebody that I think is special like Ashton Jeanty. If it's Abdul Carter at 3, different conversation. That's something where if the Bears were to give up, because there's been smoke today. Pat Leonard from the Daily News tweeted this, and I think a couple other people have noted it. Dan Weeder, who covers the Bears for the Sun-Times, mentioned it. They might be willing to move up because of the drop-off in talent. So if it's Carter, I think that I'd be willing to give up one of those 2s. If it's Jeanty, I think I'd be a little bit more hesitant about that.
That's fair. I think that makes perfect sense. So the Giant, you'd be trading up to 3 in that scenario.
Yes. So you go from 10 to 3.
Interesting.
And so maybe it's a 2, and maybe it's something, a sweetener from next year.
Yeah, next year's 3rd, or you might have to go to a 2. I think for a difference maker like Abdul Carter, yes, I think that makes sense. I think you do that, especially where the Bears are. Adding another pass rusher to that mix would kind of feel like, all right, we feel good where we are now. If we got to play a game tomorrow, we feel good, but just get one more. Just the Ocean's 11 meme. It's just one more, and then drop them in there. I like that a lot.
All right, so let's stick with the trade-up idea, not just for Jeanty. Where are the other potential trade-ups going to happen if there is one? because I do think that this class specifically, based on everything we've heard, Dane, it is a little bit of a buyer's market in the sense that it might cost a little bit less. So is there a team maybe outside of the top 10 or just in the middle of this draft that's willing to move up a little bit for their guy? Because based on everything that has kind of come out over the last 24 hours or so, it sounds like there are a lot of teams in the top 10 who might be willing to move down.
Right.
So who might be willing to move up if there are 4 or 5 different options around the top 10 for you to find a trade partner?
I will say, first off, just making a lot of texts and calls today, the craziest one was probably the Raiders calling to 2 to move up to the Browns, maybe to get Travis Hunter there. That would be...
Oh, that's Pete Carroll
yes,
all the way.
It's 100% is. That was probably the craziest that I heard. In terms of teams, like maybe outside the top 10, are the Cowboys going to be aggressive in this draft? I'm really fascinated with the Cowboys are going to do at 12. I think they have their eyes on an offensive player, and are they content sticking at 12 and saying, we feel good, one of our guys is going to be there? Or do they want to trade into the top 10 and go get him and be aggressive? So who
do you think is the most likely partner with that? Is it Carolina?
Carolina,
That's the one that continues to make the most sense to me.
Right. And, Carolina's done a lot of work on defensive players. They've done a lot of work on Jalen Walker. They've done a lot of work on Walter Nolan. Maybe more than any other team. So that would make sense if they're going to trade back a little bit and still feel like they're going to get a front 7 playmaker. Outside of that, was there someone that you liked?
So
Carolina makes the most sense to me.
In terms of trading back, no doubt.
In terms of going up,
trading up, those a little more difficult.
I think Denver is the easy one. Seattle, I don't know who it would be for, but they very obviously have the ammo. The one that as I'm looking at the board a little bit more, I wonder how antsy the Colts are to win.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah,
exactly.
because that would be the other
this
team.
feels like they all really need this to go very, very well next year. And again, they're a team almost like Seattle. I'm not sure who they would want to be trading up for. Maybe they feel so strongly about one of these tight ends that they don't want them, to be off the board. They want the right guy. Maybe they want to retool the offensive line.
Crazy to me.
I agree with that.
Trading up for a tight end, even in a class like this, I'm just like, man, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't love it either, but again, I could see when you get a little antsy and you feel like you have to win today, maybe you just get a little bit hyper fixated on stuff. So they're the team that I'm looking at where, I don't know if they want to move up to, maybe New Orleans wants to move down a little bit before they take their quarterback, something like that, or obviously Carolina. One of those teams, I could see them trying to jump into the back end of the top 10 for someone.
I'm fascinated with these offensive linemen. I think these offensive linemen are going to go.
And that's the range, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right where it's going to start.
We could see offensive linemen go 6, 7, 9, 10. We could see 3 going
11 even. I think it's on the board for the Niners as well.
13, 14.
Right. And that's why, Kelvin Banks, I think his floor is 13, Miami. I don't think he gets past Miami.
I think that's fair.
I think, I wouldn't be shocked if Josh Connerly goes in the top 12. Wouldn't be shocked at all. And then obviously we know Will Campbell and Armand Membu are not locked into the top 10, but we feel pretty comfortably will go in that top 10 range.
But so what if Will Campbell at 4 is still the most likely in your opinion? So in the Jeanty at 5 situation, Will Campbell at 4, that's how you probably see it getting slotted out if that's how it unfolds?
Right now, yes. I've yet to hear otherwise. That is kind of to get us to move off of that thought, yeah.
That makes sense. If Campbell goes at 4, and then we have the Raiders needing a tackle. We have the Jets needing a tackle. New Orleans did not pick up Trevor Penning's 5th-year option today, so they probably need a tackle. The Bears, you could justify offensive line. Miami, and then Indy. I think Indy makes sense because if they draft, let's say it's Kelvin Banks, they can play him at right guard this year, and Braden Smith is a free agent. And so a guard that could eventually become a tackle actually makes a lot of sense for them, and there are a decent amount of those in this class. So we're talking 5 or 6 offensive linemen in the top 14.
I wouldn't rule out the Cowboys either.
Yeah.
I mean, I think even with Guyton, first-round pick last year at left tackle, I wouldn't be surprised if they looked at their options at 12 and maybe the guy they want, option A, B, C, are gone, and they're left with maybe their top offensive lineman. That would make some sense.
Both Brock Hoffman and TJ Bass are restricted free agents after this year. And even those guys shouldn't prevent you from doing anything anyway.
Right.
But so you're going to need to reload no matter what.
But if you wanted to draft a guy again that could play guard for you now, and then if you want to move on from Terrence Steele after the year, I think that makes perfect sense. And there are a lot of teams in that sort of situation. The Bears are arguably in that situation. Right. So there's a lot of potential landing spots for offensive linemen in the top half of the first round for sure.
Yeah, and even then, like Terrence Steele, like he hasn't played up to his contract.
The injury stuff kind of derailed him.
It really did, and so you have to start thinking about that. The Cowboys, I think they're going to go offense, but there's a lot of different ways on offense they could go. And then I think we start talking about, like I had one scout tell me he thought Zabel is going to go top 15. And it's just about, okay, like ahead of the Bengals, Seattle. So it's okay, where? Is that Miami at 13? Is that a spot for Zabel?
Arizona is another team that could potentially draft an interior offensive lineman at 16.
Yep.
Like, I wouldn't rule that out at all.
Right. And then Booker obviously is...
Atlanta just lost their center.
Yeah. And they're promoting from within. We talk about Booker and how... scheme specific he probably is, and he just won't be for everybody. But for the right team, he has some grades that are Pro Bowl level grades from some teams, and so if he goes in the top half of round 1, that's not a surprise.
Yeah. So let's keep moving through positions here, because the tackles going in that way I think makes perfect sense. Yeah. My next question here is: do teams bet on the toolsy pass rushers as high as we might think? Because you have Mykel Williams and Shamar Stewart. Where's Mykel in your top 100?
20?
He's 20. Okay. Yeah. But Shamar Stewart's in the top 10, right?
Yeah, it was 9.
So, and then Shamar Stewart, Jalen Walker. So where do those toolsy kind of defensive players that we maybe have struggled to bucket a little bit, how high do those guys go? And that to me is another very intriguing question.
Yes.
Because if you're sitting there at 11, the Niners to me are a really interesting team in this way. The Niners, if you're at 11, do you go for one of the defensive tackles that you feel like is a little bit, not a sure thing, but more of a known quantity? Or do you bet on the super high upside with some of the edge guys? And that calculus for a lot of teams, picking like 8 to 20, that's going to be really interesting to watch unfold.
I'm kind of stepping on what we're going to talk about later with just widest draft range, but let's just talk about it here. Because I think it's a lot of these guys. Like Shamar Stewart, like I know like the Saints, I know how some of their coaches on that defensive staff feel about Shamar Stewart, and they like him quite a bit. Doesn't mean he's going to be the pick. So, but if he went 9, it wouldn't be a surprise. He could go 9. He could go 29. Neither of those two outcomes would be surprising. I think same thing with Walter Nolan, who I would put in this bucket as more of a pass rusher, a guy that's going to create disruption. He could go 8. Like I said, Carolina's done a lot of work on him. He could go 8. He could slip into the 20s. Neither would be surprising. So there's just a wide range on these pass, and Mike Green as well, because again, not super clean off the field, and we just don't know exactly how teams are going to use that information and feel good about it. One team's going to feel one way, another team's going to feel a completely different way. So Mike Green could go theoretically 11 to the Niners, or he could slip well into the 20s. Who knows? Maybe he falls to 32 in the Eagles, So I think the pass rushers, including Walter Nolan in that mix, are maybe the most, the widest draft ranges. And, Mykel Williams, I think he's got a lot of fits, I think, that I don't see him falling out of the, let's say 16, Arizona. I don't see him falling past Arizona. I think there's too much love for him.
If the Bears took him at 10, I'd sleep very easy.
9, 10, and then once you get to 49ers, a couple of those teams in like the 8 or the 9 to 16 range. I think there's several fits in there for Mykel Williams that you feel like you're getting a high floor run defender and a pass rusher who's just kind of scratching the surface about what he can do. He's 20 years old. I think there's definitely enough love out there for Mykel Williams that he's going to go somewhere in the top half of round 1. These other pass rushers, Mike Green, Shamar Stewart, a little more volatile where they can still go top 12. And you could certainly understand how they came to that conclusion, but if they're still available at 25, I don't think I'd be shocked either.
That's why I kind of feel like, especially with the way we just talked about the tackles, I do feel like some of these pass rushers are going to fall. Because when I look at, maybe it's just the way that
you mean edge rusher, or do you just mean defensive lineman in general?
Oh, just the edge rusher. Okay. Sorry, mostly the edge rusher. I actually think that the defensive tackles, I think, actually probably will go fairly high. But for me, it's just like when I hear about what I've heard about from some of the offensive tackles, and then when I just watch them, the top 5 guys in this class to me with Campbell, Membu, Banks, Simmons, Connerly, I look at all those guys and I'm like, assuming the health obviously with Simmons, if they're all healthy, like those are top 15 picks to me, like easily. Whereas I look at guys like Shamar Stewart, for as much as I like Mykel Williams, Mike Green having the off field, these are guys where like, but this is at like 23.
But this is the conversation we've had the entire process. Yeah. Where I think all of the offensive linemen, we did the show yesterday, I like a lot of them,
Yeah.
but they all have limitations. There's always a cap. There's a cap on most of their ceilings. I think Simmons and Membu are probably the guys that have the highest potential among that group.
That's fair.
They could be
Everyone
the
else,
all-pros.
and I think Banks is you could probably make an argument. Again, I think he doesn't have short arms, but he's not as long as like an elite offensive tackle prospect.
Yeah, he's
typically
33 and a half.
Yes. And so I think, and you see that show up a little bit. So I think for him, it's like, all right, I think he's a good player, but I think there are limitations. For some of the pass rushers, even if they're not known quantities now, those limitations don't really exist in theory. And so I think that discussion with, do we want to take something we think is a little bit safer, or do we want to take a home run swing with some of these guys? Yeah. That discussion in some of these buildings in that range of the draft, it's what I've been thinking about for the last 2 months as we've been doing this. Where are teams going to land in that kind of argument and debate between those two sides?
These players that we're talking about at the top, Tyler Warren, Kelvin Banks, even though they are, for lack of a maybe better phrase, like they are high floor, low ceiling. You know, like you feel like you know what you're getting with them. Like I think teams are going to find value in that.
Yeah,
especially
so
at
too.
tackle.
Yeah,
That's
right.
a position you want a guarantee.
Floor, that's a good point. Floor is worth seeking out a tackle 100%.
As opposed to chasing the upside. And, you know, I think that teams, and they're clean players in terms of off the field, intangible wise, like Banks has high character reviews, Tyler Warren, high character reviews. There is a lot of value in that in terms of just hitting it on the fairway and being comfortable with the player in person you're bringing into your building, your locker room. And they're good players too. I don't want to make it sound like it's a massive drop off in terms of play, but that is a theme with what we're talking about here in terms of guys going maybe a little bit earlier than we've talked about at times in the top 10.
Some of these other positions that we don't typically think is highly drafted spots, and the fact that this year's class either has really good players at those positions or a lot of options potentially in the first round. Two spots that I think are worth watching. Are we really going to see two tight ends go in the top 15? Yeah. Are the tight ends players that maybe they end up falling to the 20s because we've talked about this? Are we pumping them up as top 12 prospects because of the class, or are we pumping them up as top 12 prospects because that's the type of player they are? So is Colston Loveland on the board at 22 for the Chargers, or is he gone by 14 with the Colts? Yeah. And so how far the tight ends can fall and like how high they actually go, I think is going to be a really fun thing to watch tomorrow night.
I want to go back to what you said earlier with Jeanty, because people talk about it's a deep running back class, you can skip on him, but when you're talking about a blue chip talent at the top of it, it changes it. Like that guy doesn't count, so you actually should just take that guy. When I look at the tight ends, I really like Colston Loveland and I really like Tyler Warren. They're not blue chip.
They're not Brock Bowers.
It's not like Brock Bowers. It's not even like Kyle Pitts. And obviously the Pitts thing has like fallen away. But as a rookie, he was exactly what you wanted a top 5 tight end to be. Whereas these are more to me guys that you take at, pick 20 and stuff. And so I think that actually is a position where teams might look at and go, you know what? I can get a Terrence Ferguson in the second round or something like that. Harold Fannin in the third, whatever, as opposed to having to go and take Loveland. So that is one of those positions, like some guy has to fall. I do wonder if the tight ends don't go as high as like we all have them on boards and stuff like that. They might still be good players, but it's just I don't know if they're going to go that high.
I'm looking at it right now. We just don't see tight ends typically go this high. I mean, you look at the last like 15 years or like the last 10 years essentially. We got Kyle Pitts and TJ Hawkinson in the top 10. But other than that, your first round picks are Bowers at 13. And we all thought Bowers was an incredible prospect. Yeah. He falls to 13. And then it's guys like O.J. Howard at 19, Noah Fant at 20, Evan Ingram, Dalton Kincaid, Hayden Hurst, David Njoku in the 20s.
It's the second half of the first round.
So the idea of like two tight ends going in the top 15, I don't think we've ever seen that happen since you've been doing this.
Yeah, it's definitely rare. It's an uncommon thing. And so, if it does come to fruition, it would be different.
An indictment of this class is what it would be.
Very much so, exactly. And I don't know, is part of it like teams looking for their Brock Bowers and like maybe there's something to that. But I think more so it's just, looking at this class and saying, all right, looking at who's available for us, how do we get better? And if teams only have, say, 15 first-round grades and 2 of them are tight ends and – let's say the Colts, where they're picking in the first round, like, are you going to take a second round offensive lineman or corner as opposed to a first round tight end on your board? Like, or are you going to stay true to your scouting and the board that you built? And I think that's some of the conversations that they're having now in the war room as they kind of finalize things.
The tight ends, when you look at it, because I think the people have mocked Tyler Warren to the Jets every once in a while as part of the process. I think the tackles, there would be enough of them there where if I were the Raiders and the Jets, it would be hard for me to pass on those guys based on what my needs are and based on the type of prospects we're talking about. So let's say in this hypothetical, we get to 8 with Carolina, and both tight ends are still on the board. I don't think Carolina can justify that based on what their needs are and the defensive players who are going to be available. The Saints, I don't think they can justify that based on what they need along the lines and the guys that would be available. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe they're one of the teams.
Yeah.
Maybe they're one of the teams that just says, you know what?
Like if Tyler Warren's there,
if Tyler Warren's there,
Foster Moreau's their starting tight end. Like,
so let's say Membu and Will Campbell are off the board by that point.
Okay.
And you, again, the other offensive line prospects we're talking about, it's like, we'd rather just take the guy we think is a safe tight end. I can sort of justify that. Other than that, though, it's like, I guess the Bears could take a tight end. Like, again, that to me it doesn't really stack up to the other needs that they have and the other players that would be available. What I'm trying to say here is that I think that there could be a scenario where we get to 14 for the Colts and both of the tight ends are still on the board. Like, that would not be shocking to me.
No.
Based on the other needs that are ahead of them in the first half of the first round.
And then it'd be interesting if the Colts do go tight end, which one would they take?
Yeah.
Where I think Loveland's a little more Chris Ballard, but Tyler Warren's a little more like ready to go, and you feel like, he's just more NFL ready to help your current situation. So that would be interesting.
Derrik, you're curious about where the receivers are ultimately going to shake out here. After Teterow and McMillan, like, who goes? Is it Matthew Golden at 12 if McMillan's off the board? If McMillan is the pick for Dallas at 12, what happens to the rest of the receivers? This is similar to me. Again, we're talking about the 2023 class. I think that McMillan is probably I was going to say I think McMillan's in a different class of players than those guys. I like him. I don't love him.
Yeah.
So
I think he is, but it's just like there also is no class above him. Like there is a class above him that nobody is in. So,
yes. Yeah. And so and Travis Hunter to me is not part of this conversation.
Right.
He's just a different sort of thing.
Yeah.
But other than that, it does remind me a little bit of that 2023 group
Jackson
where
Smith-Njigba,
Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, they all come off the board in the 20s. So it feels like that could be the way this shakes out based on the types of players we're talking about, Derrik. But I think there are enough teams in the top 20 who might need a receiver where maybe those guys come off the board a little bit earlier, but I really don't know. Like if Matthew Golden gets into the 20s, would it surprise you? Not really, right?
I'd say it's probably more likely, honestly. I mean, because when you look at the top 20, how many teams?
Especially if he gets past Dallas, right? Like if he gets past there, then it's just like, it's kind of just Arizona.
I mean, the Bucs have flirted with him a little bit, but that'd still be surprising with all their defensive needs.
I think the Broncos still need a receiver.
Yes.
I still think the Broncos need another receiver.
100%. The Cowboys are interesting at 12. This is my belief, and maybe I'll be wrong. If McMillan's on the board, I don't think he's on the board at 13. But if he were to get past the Cowboys, then it becomes really interesting. Then we really get like 2023, where we don't have receivers off the board until we get to the 20s, and then maybe it's boom, boom, boom. Broncos, Steelers, Packers,
I can't wait for Atlanta to draft a receiver in the first round. I cannot wait.
I mean, they've done crazier things. Just see last year. So
Ray McLeod played a bunch of snaps for that team last year.
He's a starter right now.
They're an 11 personnel team, and he is their third receiver. Like, it would be hilarious if they did that with some of the pass rushers on the board, but I don't think it's totally unjustifiable.
Him and Drake London would be the most just go up and get the ball like grouping that we've had in a very long time.
It's in Seattle also, I think, is a team that probably needs a receiver. There are likely going to be enough interior offensive linemen on the board at that point where...
And they have enough picks that they can throw.
And Seahawks fans might lose their minds if they pass on some of those guys. But if they took Matthew Golden there and then they waited for like the Arizona guard in the second round or some of those other interior offensive linemen, I think you could make an argument for that being a reasonable path for the Seahawks.
First round is all about finding impact guys. Yeah. And so if you come to the conclusion that the receiver is going to make a bigger impact for you than the guard, then by all means, go that direction. And this is a receiver class that it's not like the day two. There's guys on day two that you can get excited about, but it's like a group of 5 or 6 names. We're not talking about double-digit names, in my opinion, on day two that you're really getting jacked up about passing on one in the first round. So, yeah, it just comes down to how you feel about the player. I mean, there are teams where Emeka Buka is wide receiver 2 on their board. So if Ibuka is the second receiver drafted, and whether he goes, let's say McMillan goes 12 to the Cowboys, and say Cardinals or the Seahawks, like if they win Ibuka, I don't think that'd be crazy. That's certainly possible. Monty Austinfort likes drafting Ohio State guys in the first round, so can't rule that one out. And then there are some teams that are Luther Burden teams. How does he factor into it? This isn't a McMillan, Golden, Ibuka, Burden. there's so many differing stacks of receivers from team to team, just like every position. So
we talked about this. I mean, you have Burden and Ibuka like right next to each other.
Yeah,
and like,
and they're polar opposites.
How you see those players based on what you need. Like for me, I think a team, and we played this out when we did our on the clock shows. If you're Denver at 20, I think Burden for them is very interesting from a skill set perspective. I'm not sure Sean Payton would love the details, but from a skill set perspective, like what does this offense need? Is somebody you can just spit the ball out to and have him make plays? That's interesting to me in a way that like with Ibuka, it's like, that wouldn't move the needle for me. Like that pick for the Broncos, I wouldn't have a reaction. If the Broncos pick Luther Burden at 20, I'd be like, all right, like we're cooking now. Like that's something I could talk myself into.
Yeah, this could be something. And that's a good way to think about it. And that's, you think about the Chargers, you think about
and
the
I don't
Packers.
dislike Ibuka. That's not what the statement is.
100%.
It's just, there's the stylistic differences in the players.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of teams in the 20s, these playoff teams where you could make that argument where Burden's like, okay. And then Ibuka, it's kind of like, all right, he's a pro receiver ready to step in and be a guy. So, these receivers are fascinating because we might not have one in the top 10. We might only have one in the top 20. And obviously that's a lot different than we had last year. And then we have a few in the 20s. But yeah, I'm very interested to see where these receivers go. Could we have more tight ends in the top 20 than receivers? Yeah, certainly possible.
With Ibuka specifically, like if he went to the Chargers at 22, I'd be like, great.
Yeah.
I just need like a human being who can play receiver on the Los Angeles Chargers.
You know why I actually love that? I actually kind of think McConkey is better as an outside player.
Like, and I do think they're both flexible enough
they
that
can
either
both
one of them
both.
could go inside outside.
Right.
But, and I think Ibuka kind of solves two problems for them. One, well, actually like three. One, I think you can put McConkey outside a little bit more, and then McConkey can be a little bit more of your vertical guy, which I think he is really, really good at. Ibuka can do some of the, we just want to throw a screen to a guy, and he can get us 6 tough yards. Like, I think he's really good at that. And then Ibuka kicks ass in the run game. And that, I think, is what they want. Like, that's obviously more of like a cherry on top thing, but you could see why they would want a player like that.
Ibuka in the run game is funny to me because I think he's fine. I just think he cared about run blocking so much more than any of the other receivers in the class that when you stack them all up one after the other, it was almost jarring to watch someone who even tried to block anybody.
But that's something that NFL coaches care about.
Yeah, and I cared about it. When I watched it, I was like, this is nice. This is refreshing.
He cares, exactly. And that was one of the knocks on Brian Thomas last year. I'm not saying that's why he fell where he did, but that was something that came up when you talked about Brian Thomas with teams. Is like, I wish he, when the ball wasn't going to him, I wish he cared a little bit more. And so
that's how I feel about McMillan.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean,
yeah. And honestly, sometimes that's just kind of how they're coached. It's like, hey, don't stress yourself out, save your juice, and just foot off the pedal. Like they're kind of coached that way now in high school and college in those offenses where it's just up tempo and you don't want to wear these guys out. So that's part of the equation as well. But Ibuka is, like we've said, the ultimate pro. You know what you're getting with him, wrapped in transparent wrapping paper, and that has value for teams picking in the back half of round 1.
The mirror image of the receiver conversation is what might happen with the corners on the other side of the ball, because we know where Travis Hunter is going to go.
Yeah.
After that, shrug.
This is where I'm most interested. I'm super interested in how this falls because Will Johnson, I think, obviously coming into the season, then if you look at his best tape, it's like, okay, that's a top 12 player. But with some of the medicals and it seems like teams are iffy on him. Like he's a guy who could fall to 27 at this point. I don't think it would be that crazy. Jedi Barron is a tough one because I don't think he's like a surefire play him outside type of corner. He's a little bit more of like a slot guy. Sometimes he can play safety. He's a little bit on the smaller side. So is that really a guy teams actually want to take in the top 12? And then after that, you get this grab bag of the Trey Amos, A.Z. Thomas, Siobhan Revell. Like our team's going to look a little bit past the medical and be like, okay, this is a guy we want to take in the top 20. Like I really think you could show me 8 different orders of the cornerbacks coming off the board after Travis Hunter, and any of them I could probably agree to.
Maxwell Hairston,
Hairston as well.
Yeah. I've been trying to prepare people for the Will Johnson stuff. I've been saying for a while now, like, hey, he's not gonna run a 40. The medicals are an issue. Like, don't be surprised. If he's on the board when the Packers pick, like, would Goody really draft a corner without a 40-yard dash? I don't know. But it's possible he could be there. But there are several teams that could use a corner that will be have to make a decision. You think about the Dolphins, the Jalen Ramsey stuff.
Yep.
The Dolphins at 13 are a possibility.
But that's what it's so interesting to me. They're a possibility, but they have like 3 needs you could argue are bigger than corner.
Right.
And there are a lot of teams like that in that range of the draft.
Cardinals are a possibility for corner.
Same deal.
Yep.
Cincy.
Tampa, same deal. Yeah, certainly. There are a lot of teams that could go in that direction. That's why if we have just Travis Hunter go in the top 20 among corners, that's certainly a plausible scenario.
I think that's right. Because if you look at the teams picking from like 10 to 20, Dallas needs a corner, but they probably need a receiver more. The Dolphins need a corner. They probably need a interior offensive lineman and an interior defensive lineman more than they need a corner. The Colts, we'll see what happens with Juju Brents. They signed Charvarius Ward in free agency. Atlanta needs a corner, but they probably need a pass rusher more than they need a corner.
Yeah.
The Cardinals need a corner. They probably need a pass rusher and interior offensive lineman more than they need a corner.
At least the Cardinals have one pass rusher. Atlanta doesn't have any.
But as you keep going down here, and the Bucks, right? The Bucks at 19. They need a corner. They probably need a pass rusher more than they need a corner.
Right.
So there's a lot of teams in that range where I think that's kind of how the conversation feels to me. Packers, same way. They could use a corner, but they could probably use a pass rusher somewhere along the way as much or more than they need a corner.
And who's the second corner drafted? Who's the third corner? Like I think that if Maxwell Harrison's the second corner drafted, I think it'd be a shock for a lot of people, but I kind of get it. Again, if you have questions about Will Johnson and the speed and the injuries, if you think Jedi Barron's strictly a nickel, then maybe you shift to a Maxwell Harrison and his 4.2 speed, and that's the next guy off the board for whoever it could be. So you mentioned the Cowboys, and that's an interesting. Say McMillan's off the board at 9 to the Saints. Because Diggs, who knows when we see him back on the field. Deron Bland's a solid player, but they lose Jordan Lewis.
Free agent after this year, Bland.
Exactly, which they're going to figure it out. I would think they're going to figure that out, but it's the Cowboys. Who knows? So
franchise tag inevitability.
Yeah, right. And they got to figure Micah out too. So I think with them, Will Johnson at 12, is that a possibility? Like, corner's definitely a direction they could go. It gets a little bit murky about, is there one there that's worth it for them?
I think what's interesting, too, is my order of the corners is, like, very different than I think a lot of
What is it?
I would take Amos at, like, 11. I think he is unbelievably good. Like, he was a guy I just watched, like, 2 drives of, and he just moves like a Pro Bowl corner, whereas I watch a guy like Hairston, and I'm just like, he's a little bit undersized. I don't really love some of that.
How do you feel about Will Johnson? Like let's play this out, and let's say Will Johnson's healthy, and let's say if he ran, it would be like a 4 or 5 flat. And you combine that with the tape, where would you land on Will Johnson?
I think he's pretty good. I think you see some of like the gambling traits that you want from like a good zone corner. Like, he's got quick feet. His eyes are good. He's very decisive, like baiting the quarterback and all that stuff.
What about the Bucks? Why don't you try that on for me?
I mean, that's actually like the perfect style of quarterback they need, because Todd Bowles is going to throw a bunch of stuff and let his cornerbacks jump. I think my thing with that is I would much rather have A.Z. Thomas from Florida State. Not like over him directly, but 20 picks later. I would much rather have him, because I think they probably run about the same, and I think Thomas is like a very technically sound player, and I think he's a little bit more put together as a man coverage guy than Will Johnson is.
Yeah, that 4.58 hurt.
It hurts, but I'm not sure Will Johnson would run that much faster than that.
I know. That's the question mark. I mean, and that's one guy just didn't run, the other guy did. So
right. So if Thomas just didn't run, like maybe he's 10 spots higher on boards.
Talk about Jalen Ramsey for the Dolphins. That's one of my other questions here. Do we see any veteran player trades? Do we see them on draft weekend? Does Jalen Ramsey get traded? Kirk Cousins is probably going to wait. We mentioned that.
Yeah.
Does Jair Alexander get traded?
Mm-hmm.
Mark Andrews, George Pickens. Like, who is the veteran that potentially gets dealt this weekend? Is there a surprise that we're not thinking about? And how does that potentially shake up some of these needs that we're talking about if it happens on the first 2 nights of the draft?
Yeah, and it all depends how the first round plays out, right? If the Steelers draft Golden at 21, all right, then we can be on Pickens watch. When do they trade him to the Cowboys? Like, how does that play out? So like I think that's the first round will tell us a lot about who's going to be dealt, what you could potentially see. If Jeanty does go to the Jaguars, could ETN, kind of like the DeAndre Swift situation when Gibbs was drafted? They shipped off Swift for a 4th round pick to the Eagles.
Yeah.
Could we see ETN go for a day 3 pick? If that comes to fruition. So we're definitely going to see a little bit of movement, but I don't know. Any surprises for you?
I think for me, the player I least expect to be on their team by the end of draft weekend is Mark Andrews. I would just be
interesting.
With as well as Isaiah Likely has played, Andrews is getting up there. He's
Likely's
had some
also
injury
free agent
stuff.
I said they're both free agents, yeah.
He just feels like a player that they're ready to pay, like to play at pay. And this is a team that like they'll do this with players where it'll be like this 3-year development arc, and then they finally get to where they want them to be, and it's like, all right, we think you're a starter now, and we'll pay you. And so I kind of think they're leaning that way in the tight end room. Whereas Andrews, I think if you're the Colts, if you're the Broncos, like that's still a guy that I think if you can trade for him for a reasonable amount, he does a lot for your team.
So I was thinking about this today. I was going through just building the rundowns for tomorrow and like stuff for tomorrow and just putting together team needs and expiring contracts for every team. And you look at the Ravens, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, and Charlie Kolar. All three are free agents after the year. And so now my mind starts spinning and I'm sitting there being like, all right, let's say the Cardinals want to move down and Colston Loveland is a Raven. Like the Ravens needing a tight end, actually, if you look at the structure of like the roster and when guys are going to be free agents, it's not that crazy.
No.
For them to potentially draft one and then maybe trade like a Mark Andrews. I don't think it's like out of the realm of possibility.
I kind of just hate it for Mark Andrews that his final play in a
that
Baltimore
was
uniform
it was,
would
yeah,
be,
exactly.
Like that's killer. But no, I like it. I like the line of thinking there. I mean, Baltimore's a team that they will think outside the box, and they're picking so late. They're at 27. So which direction could they move around a bit? Could they just wait? Like, I mean, Baltimore's such a good drafting team that.
Let's say I guess I was going to say, let's say the Steelers want to move down right at 21 because you jumped the Chargers.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that doesn't.
Right.
They have traded before though.
They have, yeah.
I mean, they have done that before, but that's one where like I was going to say that makes sense, but within the division, maybe it makes a little bit less sense. The one for me, like the guy I think is just least likely to be on his team, if it's not this weekend, then a month from now, is Pickens. Like I can't imagine him playing for the Steelers this year. And I can't imagine a team saying, you know what, it might work for us. It hasn't worked for anybody else, but it might work for us.
He is the most it might work for us player on the block by a million.
The fact that he's in a contract year and like, what's the return? A fourth?
Yeah, I think that's about what it is. And again, if you're a team, let's throw out a hypothetical. If you're Green Bay and you think what is the best pathway for us to get like a big time vertical player?
Right.
Him for a 4th round pick, you could absolutely get there if you were trying to rationalize it.
The idea of the Packers bringing in another receiver who you don't know what you're going to get on a given down, I think I would start to lose my mind.
But at the same time, like you don't know what you're getting from the quarterback on a given down in terms of play extension, in terms of what he's trying to do, and a guy he can just throw the ball up to. They don't have one of those guys on the roster right now. I don't think I would do it. I'm not sure I would invite that element into my building. But from a skill set perspective, I think that it actually is a little bit more fun than you're making it out to be.
That would be interesting. And especially if the Steelers do draft a receiver in the first round, it's kind of like, all right, well, there goes some leverage because you know he's available. And I couldn't do it either, but it is interesting to talk about. And, you know, teams invite far worse into their building. So, you know, I think there'd be a few teams willing to do it.
Next one, Derrik, you wanted to talk about this. Does the league actually like any of the interior offensive linemen that we have pegged to potentially go in the back half of the first round? I'm talking about Tyler Booker, Gray Zabel, Donovan Jackson. Like these are all guys that in our On the Clock series, Ben Solak took Donovan Jackson at 17 to the Bengals. Gray Zabel has been mocked to the Seahawks a million different times in this. Tyler Booker has been somebody that could go in the top half of the first round. So do teams actually like these guys that much? I think is a worthwhile question because of some of the question marks associated with those players.
It's just a weird interior class. Like Tyler Booker, I think when you watch him on film, you can see some of the power. And he's a young player. He's a very smart player. And so I could see teams buying him. I could also see teams being like, if we're a zone team, we don't really love him. And also, you know, he tested very, very poorly. Typically, that caliber of athlete doesn't go very high in the draft. So he can be up in the air. Zabel, I know, you know, he kind of dominated the lower level of school, but he's an older guy who's coming from a small school, and he's natively a tackle. Like, this is not a guy that we've seen play the interior before, and that hasn't stopped teams before. You know, Graham Barton was mostly a tackle at Duke and then obviously transitioned to center, and he was awesome. So it can happen, but I think it does invite volatility in terms of where he's going to go. And then Donovan Jackson, sure, a team could get, you know, a little bit desperate in the top 20 and say, we just need a guard, and this is a guy who plays guard. We're going to take him. This also is, to me, a guy who profiles as more of a guy you take in the second round. So I don't think he's a guarantee to go in the first round. I just think I almost wouldn't be surprised if the first, quote, guard off the board is one of the first 3 tackles that a team just decides is going to be a guard, like maybe it's Kelvin Banks or something. I just don't feel confident that any of these true interior guys are like surefire top 20 picks.
Zabel's the only one that I think, I kind of pushed back a little bit just because he dominated the Senior Bowl.
Yeah,
seeing him at guard and center and it wasn't like he was like, oh, he's kind of good. Mm-hmm. He dominated. He was the best player there. And I think that really helps the evaluation for teams. Booker, absolutely. Even though I have him above Zabel in my own personal rankings just because the tape is that good, he's just not going to be for everybody. Plain and simple. Yeah. We don't see those testing scores. It's just not going to be a fit for some of these teams. And then Donovan Jackson, I'm with you. I don't see first-round tape at guard for Donovan Jackson. At tackle, I think it's he's doing a little bit better. You see the versatility. You can, I think, talk yourself into him. But I just show me the first-round guard tape. I just don't see it personally. And I think that's how a lot of teams view Donovan Jackson. They view him more as a day 2 player than day 1. Now, maybe he would sneak into the first round, but I don't think by any means it's I think there's a better chance he goes day 2 than day 1. But, yeah, I think what you're saying is I think what a lot of teams are kind of talking about is we could use an interior, Seattle, for example. We could use an interior player if Zabel's off the board. Does Booker fit us? Not really. How do we, Donovan Jackson, we don't view it as that type of player. So what's going to be our plan B in round 2?
And that moment, I think there are a lot of other positions you can get there with.
Opens the board a little bit.
Receiver, if Golden's there, et cetera. I think that makes a lot of sense for that range of the draft. I was going to ask you, who would you be more surprised being on the board at 25, Zabel or Booker? And I think the answer is pretty clearly Zabel.
Yes, I'd be shocked, yeah. If he gets past, because you have to get past Seattle, you have to get past Minnesota. I just think there are too many teams you have to get by. But, yeah, we'll see.
Booker and Derrik Harmon, to me, are the two guys that when they're on the board at 26 through 28 for the Ravens and the Lions and they draft those players, we're just going to be like, how do we let this happen? Oh, no.
Harmon is an injury stuff.
The injury stuff, yes. But even still, if he falls into the mid-20s and gets drafted by one of those teams and then is a good player immediately, it's going to be the least surprising thing that happens in this process for me.
Harmon's going to go to the Steelers at 21 and be the next Cameron Hayward.
Yeah, it's going to be carbon copy.
Yes, exactly. It's going to happen. And we'll look back and say, because Hayward went in the late first round.
Yeah.
It was kind of the same
Him
type
and
of deal.
Cam Jordan were both picked in the 20s that year, right?
Yeah. It feels like 30 years ago now, but
it was.
It feels like it. But yeah, no, I think you're exactly right.
I'm looking at it right now. I just want to get that right. So Cam Jordan went at 24 and Cam Hayward went at 31 in that draft. Jeez. James Carpenter, one pick after Cam Jordan. Multiple James Carpenter mentions on the Athletic Football Show.
I'll never forget Saban's reaction live when Carpenter was drafted. He gave a wow. So that took Saban by surprise when that happened.
That's how you know you made the right pick. Yeah. One team-specific question you had, Derrik, is that you want to know after this draft what the Niners want to be on defense. And I think what they do at 11 will potentially tell us a lot about what they're trying to put together on that side of the ball.
They could go any number, because if we think of what their defense was, 4 years ago, where it was, okay, you had DJ Jones, who was stuffing, the run up the middle. You had, obviously, Nick Bosa, and then you had just a cavalry of guys across from him who were really good secondary and third down pass rushers. Then, obviously, you had Fred Warner, but you also had Azeez Al-Shaair, Andre Green. Like, your front just had this kick-ass attitude to it. Now it's kind of just like Nick Bosa and a bunch of guys, and then obviously you still have Fred Warner.
Nick Bosa and the 2022 Browns. That's what it is.
Right, and so I think because they're at 11 and not that many of the front guys are going to be off the board, they could go in so many directions. Do they want to do the kind of bigger, longer upside guys with Shamar Stewart or Mykel Williams? Do they want to go that direction? Do they just see a speed rusher in Mike Green and go, all right, he's going to get to the quarterback and we're just going to go get him? Do they want to go interior, which again brings up different stuff? Do they want the size of Kenneth Grant or just the pure run stopping of Derrik Harmon? Or do they go, Walter Nolan is really flashing, he's going to get to the quarterback?
To me, if he's there at 11, that's the one that makes the most sense to me.
Walter Nolan. I can't get there, but it does feel like a very Robert Saleh Niners defense.
I wouldn't do that, but stylistically, when you watch him play, and if you're going to be a one-gapping team where it's just like, hey, you go.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm letting you loose. That's the guy based in part because of how he was used at Ole Miss. Right. That's the one that is the easiest for me to picture. I can see him in the uniform now.
Not to spoil my final mock, but I've got Nolan going 11 to the 49ers.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I think that's something that could make sense for the way they want to play, for the way they want to get better on the defensive line. That one fits like a glove.
Yeah, the Niners at 11 is to me, one of the more fascinating teams in that range. And again, positionally, I think we kind of know where they might be zeroing in, but which direction they go, I think, is a comment on what they want to be. But again, it's a comment on the discussion we've been having for the last month about the tackles versus the edges and like which teams prefer because of how fully cooked the players at those positions are.
And that's the other small thing with it. Like, do they even take defense? I think it's on the board for them to take an offensive lineman. Like, that could totally happen too. So they shouldn't. They need to take a defender. They have no guys on the front seven, but maybe they love Connerly or whatever. I wouldn't hate it.
I mean, again, just as one of those guys, if you wanted to play him at left guard and then move on, I believe the right tackle whose name is escaping me right now. Yes, Colton McKivitz is a free agent after this year as well. And obviously Trent Williams is my age. And so trying to plan for a contingency there is probably worth it. Last question here, and this brings me back to, I was going to say my favorite moment of the draft shows that we've done. That's actually a pretty stiff competition because the Justin Fields moment was that kicked it all off, which was very fun in the moment and then has aged horribly. The Cole Strange first round selection when we were in Vegas, that was what I was going to say. It was probably my favorite draft moment. But then Penix last year was definitely in the conversation. But the Cole Strange...
Jahmyr Gibbs was one of my favorites too.
You loved Jahmyr Gibbs.
That's good, yeah.
But I think the Cole Strange thing is on the podium.
Yes.
So my question to you is, who do we think is the most likely or potential Cole Strange candidates for this year? The guy who could go in the first round that we are just not seeing coming.
So, like, I won't include, like, Jalen Milroe in this because that's...
Right, the quarterbacks are kind of cheating.
Yeah.
Right?
And even, like I thought, like, Trayvon Henderson, but that's someone we've talked about as, it wouldn't be crazy if the Chiefs took him or if, he snuck in there. I don't think it wouldn't be one of those moments.
We talked about this the other night. That's my, like, sneaky draft take, is that I think Trayvon Henderson is the second running back taken.
And I think that's, even if it just gets into the first round, I don't think that'd be crazy. Just team looking to capture lightning in a bottle. So this is a guy that I don't see in first round mocks, even though like he's still probably a top 50 guy. So it's not like not a true Cole Strange moment. But Jaden Higgins, the Iowa State receiver, who I don't even think is the best Iowa State receiver in the draft. I still like Higgins. I'm
not sure any of us do.
Yes, but I think we're all in agreement. Like we all really like Jalen Knoll. But with Higgins, like you think about these receivers we're talking about with Golden and Ibuka, and like they're all kind of like 6 foot, 200 pounds. Like they don't have size. Where Higgins is built more like the X that you're looking for, the big, good size athlete who ran in the 4.4s. He's 6'4", 215 pounds. You feel like he's a good athlete for that size, can win on the outside, has ball skills. Questions about physicality and all of that, but I think that for teams looking for that style of receiver, that type of guy that fits that mold, I wouldn't be completely shocked if Higgins maybe crashed the first round party for the right fit.
That wouldn't surprise me either. I would not like it.
Yeah.
That would be one where a team would do it, and I'd be like, this is sizeism run amok. This is you looking at the tail of the tape and talking yourself into somebody in a way that I just can't support.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm like my top, gosh, how many receivers here? My top 23 receivers, there's only 2 that are over 6'4", T-Mac and Higgins. So it's like, okay, if that's what we want, if we are looking for size, if we're looking for speed, and a guy that was productive consistently the last 2 years, and he was a basketball player most of his life. And so you feel like, okay, he shifted to football later in high school, dominated FCS, not dominate, but he played well at FCS. Then he goes to Big 12 the last 2 years and played at a high level. We feel like we're catching this guy on the ascent. I could understand how someone could come to that conclusion, even if I wouldn't love the idea of making that pick.
I'm going through other guys here, and no one really jumps.
I had one. I wonder if with Nick Scourton.
That was exactly the name I was about to bring up. I was just looking at him on the Beast, and that was exactly the name. I was like, I don't know about Nick Scourton.
Does a team think that what happened with him last year with adding a bunch of weight that he probably didn't need to, is there a team that just goes, you know what? What he did at his old school was actually really good, and a first-round pick, that's the guy that we believe that he can be. We're going to take him in the first round. He's the one where I just wonder if this was just kind of a bad year for him, and teams just don't believe that that's who he is.
He's young. He's 20 years old, one of the youngest players in the draft. I think I like his floor better than his ceiling.
Yeah,
and
I think that's fair. Thanks for watching the Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.